Hello friends, welcome to CEC Live Lectures. Dear friends, as you know that from time to time we conduct different lectures for you on different subjects. For the students of English, today we are going to talk on one of the most interesting topics. We are going to talk on John Dryden. John Dryden, a man of many talents, is the topic of today's discussion. And for the discussion on the topic, we have with us in our studios Dr. Inayat Chaudhary. Dr. Inayat Chaudhary is a subject expert of English, and through the live lectures of CEC, she always believes in giving her best. Friends, if you wish to ask questions from Dr. Inayat Chaudhary on today's topic, then do call us through our toll-free number. Our toll-free number is 1800110430. I repeat, our number is 1800110430. This is the toll-free number through which you can ask questions from Dr. Inayat Chaudhary on John Dryden. Friends, you are requested to call in the last 10 minutes of the lecture so that first you could get the deep insight into today's session, and yes, afterwards we promise to give answers to your questions. Now I would like to welcome our guest, Dr. Inayat Chaudhary, so that we could have a vivacious session today. Hello, Dr. Inayat Chaudhary.
Hello, Geetika. Hello, students. In today's session, we will be discussing about John Dryden. And before we begin, I want to put forward certain questions to you. Who was John Dryden? Why was he significant to the age he belonged? And why is he considered important even today? To understand all of that, I would request you to go back to my previous session where I had spoken about the historical context of the 17th century. Once you view that, then you can come to the current session, which is on John Dryden. So let us begin. So who was John Dryden? Now, John Dryden was born on 9th August 1631 into an extended family of rising Puritan gentry at Aldwinkle in Northamptonshire. In fact, he was the leading spokesperson as well as the greatest critic of his age. He was famously called the father of English criticism, the writer who first taught us to determine upon principles the merit of composition. Now, it is very important to understand the family background of John Dryden, and that is why I have begun with his biographical details. So basically, like I said, he was born in a Puritan family. And this is where starts the most interesting aspect of John Dryden and his tilt towards how he progressed in terms of writing his works, in terms of being a very significant literary figure during the 17th century. Now, as we move ahead, he was John Dryden, and he was famously known as a man of many talents. Why? Because he was not only a dramatist, but a satirist, a poet, a translator. Therefore, he had expertise in various categories. He went on to write drama, poetry, translations, and criticisms. So, what I am trying to suggest here is that John Dryden was an important figure, personality during the 17th century. And this is because, not only because of the work, but also because he was the poet laureate during that time, also because of his religious tilt that he had, also because what he expressed in his works. And this is what literature is about. So to understand anything, I always say, always look at the historical context in which the text is set. So I would like to repeat again, John Dryden belonged to the 17th century, which itself was a highly politically disturbing times, because there was a constant strain between two factions of religion. So let us move ahead on John Dryden. So in fact, he is considered to be the chief founders of modern English prose. He was also an influential literary writer of his time and played a significant role during the period of Restoration. So students, like I said, he was born somewhere in 1630s, and then it was basically, then he gradually came to writing novels, then he gradually came to writing elegies, panegyrics, and a lot of other kind of genres that he looked at. Now, one important aspect that I want to pinpoint here is the period of restoration. Now, restoration period was a very important period, chiefly because of the characteristics that it puts forward before us. One of the characteristics that we should be, I would like to discuss few of the characteristics of restoration period. The idea of comedy of manners was very relevant and echoed throughout the restoration period. There were every text, not every, let's just say a large number of texts began to be written in the heroic couplet. The stock characters of fop and rake became common and resonated throughout the works. Not only that, there was a French influence, primarily because of the setting that restoration period looks at, because restoration period, we consider it to be between 1660 to 1700. And this period becomes significant because 1660, Charles II, who was exiled, returned. And once he returned, there was a literal renaissance of the English drama. Because during the previous regime, which was by Oliver Cromwell, the Commonwealth, and Richard Cromwell, there was strictness in terms of the kind of drama, the kind of entertainment that was being put forward to the society. There were certain restrictions that were being put forward to the society. But the moment Charles II comes back, there is a literal restoration, and that's why the usage of the term restoration. There was a renaissance of the English drama, there was a renaissance of entertainment. Explicit scenes, explicit usage of language began to be used. And that is how restoration period became all the more significant. So apart from that, another characteristic that we see during this time was the French influence. French influence became significant because Charles II was exiled, and when he came back and restored and the theatres opened with a new energy, the new vigor, they adopted a lot from the French. A lot of ideas were picked up from the French style of writings, French style of works. Now, restoration period, when we talk about it, we cannot ignore the religious and the political aspect, both of which are strongly intertwined, not only during the restoration period, but during the 17th century. What I am trying to say here is that 17th century, in fact, every century is marked by various political upheavals, by various religious issues. And much like the English period, other English periods, this period too was significant in its own way. It brought forward various restoration writers, and amongst them was John Dryden. If I have to talk about any other writer or any other literary personality, we can also think of John Milton. But let's just focus on John Dryden in this session. So John Dryden was an important literary figure during this time. Firstly, he was born in a Puritan setup. So his family was tilted towards the Commonwealth. His family was, tilted towards Oliver Cromwell. But John Dryden, as we progress through, we will realize, had royalist sympathies. He was a supporter of Charles II. He was a supporter of the Church of England. And this is how he differed himself from the family setup. This is how he was different from his other family members. So let us try to understand, and for that, let us go chronologically over it and try to mark each moment of his life and understand it. So let's look at his youth and education. When one looks at his youth and education, one gets to understand that he grew up in a country which was marred by civil war. So what was civil war? Even though I have mentioned it in my previous session, I would like to repeat it again here. Civil war was between parliamentarians and the royalists. This was again significant because there was a constant tussle that one gets to witness. So a lot of attributes are granted to the significant event of civil war. Charles I was executed. Charles II went into exile, and first England began to be ruled by the Commonwealth, followed by the rule of Oliver Cromwell, who again was a Puritan, who was a Protestant. So this is what the Civil War, and this is why the Civil War became important. So he was growing up in a country which was marred by religious upheavals, which was marred by religious tensions. Now, it was in 1644 that Dryden went to Westminster School. It was here he received education in classic under the celebrated royalist Richard Busby. Now, this period again is significant because from the very beginning, when he begins his education, he is actually receiving it from a royalist. And he was a very famous personality. He was the English Anglican priest who was the headmaster of the school for more than 45 years. So, you can imagine the kind of influence a literary figure with the royalist bent must have had on Dryden. We can't conclude things here, but since literature is open to interpretation, it perhaps suggests that it was here that, John Dryden, who though had a family who was supporting the rule of Cromwell, who was not faithful supporters or not really supporters of the royalists, began to support and have royalist sympathies. And this is where it begins. Now let us move forward. Dryden published his poem, and which was the first poem, in 1649 upon the death of Lord Hastings. Now this was an important aspect in itself because the poem itself signifies his strong royalist bent of mind. This was an elegy. It was written in 1649, and perhaps this is the first hint of where we get to see John Dryden as a man, as a supporter of the royalists. Then he went to Trinity College of Cambridge, and it was, I think, around 1649 or 1650, where he is believed to have deal with a lot of subjects, be it the classics, the rhetoric, and mathematics. So roughly, students, I pinpointed the important points of John Dryden's growing up during the time of youth and education. Now, his younger days were also significant, not only because of his education, the tutor that he was engaged with, who himself was a royalist, but also because this was happening during a time which was marked by political tensions in the country. And this is what we have to understand here. So now when we look, we understand that John Dryden, from his earlier age onwards, starts having a royalist tilt. And at this time, the country was marked by the rule of Oliver Cromwell, who was a Protestant, who of course did not support the Church of England, whereas John Dryden had royalist sympathies. Can you see the clash here that is happening? And it is so interesting to see how things progress from this time onwards. So now what happens is, as one progresses through various years, on the death of Oliver Cromwell, John Dryden comes out with his first impressive poem, Heroic Stanzas on the Death of Oliver Cromwell. Now this again becomes extremely significant. What is the relevance of heroic stanza which is being written here? Why is it significant? It is significant because whereas his first work spoke about revealed his implicit tilt towards the royalist sympathies, his current work addressed to Oliver Cromwell is totally opposite to his religious belief. So was he a political turncoat? Was he an opportunist? What was he then? And this is what till today a lot of critics have questioned. Who was truly John Dryden? And this is what we are trying to understand here. And not only did he write a poem in respect of Oliver Cromwell, but he also attended the procession along with Andrew Marvell and John Milton. Now this is very significant here. Some critics have gone into a further depth and tried to understand why he went on to write a poem on Oliver Cromwell. Why did he write when he had royalist sympathies? Let us try to understand. So when one goes deeper into the life of John Dryden, one gets an idea that John Dryden's cousin was working in the government of Oliver Cromwell, who in fact helped him get a job into the government of Oliver Cromwell. And this is but an instinctive and natural way to express, maybe objectively or maybe subjectively, his respect for Oliver Cromwell. So again, do we call it, can it be seen as something where he's trying to shift his layers of support? Or is it something very natural that because he worked with the government, which was of Oliver Cromwell, it was out of respect that he went on to write, and nothing more than that? And these moves should not be read anything more than that. This is up to you readers to interpret. But if you ask me, I think it was but natural to write something in respect of somebody with whom he was engaged, to whose government he contributed, and there is, I'm sure, nothing wrong in that. In fact, it is very important to understand that Samuel Johnson too made a very significant point regarding the same. Now, what I am trying to say here is that Samuel Johnson also, went on to say that, John Dryden should not be called a political turncoat because he changed with the changing times. There is nothing wrong with it. There is nothing wrong with it. And this is what Samuel Johnson tried to determine. So this was the relevance of heroic stanza because of the time during which it was being written. And apart from this, he wrote various dedications, prefaces, prologues, epilogues, and heroic plays, which of course we will see in the latter half of our session. Now, another important aspect is the idea of praise, which echoes throughout the work that has been written by John Dryden. Why does the idea of praise become important? Is it because he wants to be seen explicitly as an opportunist? Or is it because that is something, or that is because of his creative contribution to literature? Should it just be restricted to a creative contribution? Or should it be a purposeful move to express your loyalties to a certain sect of the religion? Let us try to understand that. Now, this idea of praise can be seen in various of his panegyrics. These panegyrics he writes throughout his work. As one can see, these kind of panegyrics were seen in heroic stanzas on the death of Oliver Cromwell. This kind of panegyric can be seen in his work Astra Redux. And these kind of panegyrics can also be seen in his To His Sacred Majesty, to my Lord Chancellor, to my honored friend Dr. Charlton. But there is still something which makes all these works very significant. Let us try to understand what he is trying to suggest here. These panegyrics become important because they were not being addressed to the same sect of the religion, but they were being addressed to both the sects that were divided, that is, the Catholics versus the Protestants. Why am I saying so? Let us try to interpret it. So, heroic stanzas on the death of Oliver Cromwell, whose funeral procession he went on to attend, was basically a Protestant. He was a Puritan who was against the rule of the Church of England. But when the Restoration happened and Charles II returned from exile, he went on to write various panegyrics, be it to His Sacred Majesty, be it to my Lord Chancellor, or be it the famous Astra Redux. Now Charles too, he supported and he was a representative of the royalists. So on one side, within a span of a few months and years, he is supporting the Puritan through his work, and on the other side, he begins to support the royalists. So what I am trying to suggest here is it true that he was known as the political turncoat? Or was it just merely that he flowed with the changing times? Let us try to understand it. So when one looks at Astray Redux, it is an important work, chiefly because Astray in Greek mythology was a deity associated with justice, and she was an implicit representative of the rule of Elizabeth I. And by writing this work, what our John Dryden, the famous personality, is trying to suggest is that now with the return of Charles II, there is also the return of royal justice. He is suggesting that now peace and stability will be a common aspect to look at, that now England is in better hands, that now Charles II has become the representative of the new Augustus in this work. So interesting to look how he looks at Oliver Cromwell, and on the other side, within a span of few months, he is looking at Charles II. But again, students, I personally feel there is nothing wrong in it. He was first a writer, he was first a human, and he changed with the political times. And this is what we are trying to understand here. So now we are clearly seeing more explicitly his royalist loyalties. Now, when we move forward, we try to understand another important aspect, that it was this very time that he started writing more work. His work began to be received well by the audience, not only the audience, but the famous figures of that time. The rich, the aristocratic received his work well. You know, the students that time, the work was not written in a very formal manner. It was more of a Broadway kind of work. It was more of a scribbles that began to be depicted to demonstrate the ideas of the writers. And it was gradually that they formalized into a proper format. So when we look at his personal life, let's go further. Now his father did not have much income to support him, and that ways it became necessary and significant for John Dryden to keep writing for a living. Why? Because he lacked money. For remunerative benefits, he had to keep writing, and writing in a manner that kept the public engaged, that made him not popular, let's say, but that depicted and strongly demonstrated him as a figure with a strong creative bent of mind. So therefore, his writings, which are related through various of his allegories to the contemporary time, became significant. He came out with various dramas. He associated himself with very many well-known aristocratic figures, well-known publishers. And you know, when I look at that, a few of them, he even went on to write for the bookseller Henry Herringman. He even stayed with him for some time. After that, in late 1660s, for survival, he associated himself with Robert Howard, and both of them began writing in mutual consonance with each other. And again, he stayed at his lodgings. You know, the kind of hardships that Dryden had to go through, the kind of survival, the kind of approaches that he had to adopt. But again, students, let us try to understand here. All this didn't disturb in any way his creative, literary inputs. These were just means to reach to a level for which he is known today as a man of many talents. He even went on to address one of the panegyrics to Robert Howard. His work on Indian Queen was written in collaboration with Robert Howard, which again is equally relevant today. Why is it relevant? It is relevant because it brings forward the concept of, or slightly hints to the concept of, noble savage, something which we see in the 18th century in Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein. The idea, the cult of noble savage becomes significant in the later centuries to come. He introduces us to it. He even introduced us to the idea of rhymed heroic plays. These plays are significant in themselves. The idea of heroic couplet is also significant. Why? That I have discussed in a bit later. So therefore his association with Robert Howard was significant, not only for his literary achievements, but also his personal life. He went on to marry Robert Howard's sister, Elizabeth Howard. Lady Elizabeth Howard bore him 3 children, who were all sons: Charles, John, and Erasmus Henry. So students, till now we have tried to understand how John Dryden moved and balanced both his creative life, his professional life, as well as his personal life, and how all the events that took place were significant in their own way and contributed to each other. There was juxtaposition of events, there was effect on his work of these events, and vice versa. In the next session, I will be looking at in further detail of the events that we've discussed here and try to establish why John Dryden is significantly important in today's time and why indeed he's been given the title of a man of many talents. Thank you, students.
With this note, we would like to thank Dr. Nayat Chaudhary for giving us a vivacious session where we discussed who John Dryden was. Friends, there is a lot more for you, as Dr. Nayat Chaudhary herself said. So you are requested to be with us. We will be back after a short break. Thank you. Hello friends, welcome back in this session. Friends, as you know that we are talking on John Dryden today. We have a very huge question over here, why John Dryden was called as a man of many talents. This question is yet to be answered. Friends, in our previous session we discussed a lot on John Dryden, and in this session also we hope to give you the maximum of knowledge on John Dryden. Friends, for the discussion on the topic, we have with us in our studios Dr. Inayat Chaudhary. If you wish to ask questions from Dr. Inayat Chaudhary, then do call us through our toll-free number. Our number is 1800110430. Now I would like to welcome our guest Dr. Inayat Chaudhary once again and would request her to continue the lecture further. Hello.
Thank you, Geetika. Students, Let us begin with where we left. I gave you a brief about who John Dryden was. We looked at some of his biographical details. We looked at how he began writing his work in the 17th century. From 1660s onwards, his work became more politically inclined. How various implicit references made him a royalist sympathizer, as well as how his creative contribution highlighted him as an important literary figure of not only his time, but even to this day. So let us move ahead. So in the last session, I had spoken about some of his personal details and tried to establish how John Dryden's professional life and personal life were intermingled with each other. So much so that his works gave various explicit and implicit references to the happenings of his contemporary times. So what I was trying to say in the last session was, before I ended it, that John Dryden went on to associate himself with the famous personalities of the 17th century, be it the various literary figures, be it various aristocratic men, and so on. So he had associations with Robert Howard, he had certain collaborations with Henry Herringman, the bookseller, and he went on to write some really wonderful works. So his Indian Queen was a collaboration which he wrote with Robert Howard. The sequel to the Indian Queen, known as the Indian Emperor, was written by John Dryden individually. And this is where we start to get a glimpse of a sense of confidence that he is now able to gain, a sense of responsibilities that now he is ready to take on, to be a part of the literary circle. His friends were growing, but so were his enemies. And this is what we will be engaging our discussion on as we move forward. This aspect I will be discussing as we progress onwards with the various commentary made by me. So gradually he became well known and regular writer for King's Company, which was owned by Thomas Killigrew. Like I said, Restoration period was a significant period where a large number of theatrical companies came forward. Licenses were given to these companies. And one of such company was King's Company. It was a well-established company. And that is how Dryden contributed to this company. He wrote a sequel to the Indian Queen, known as the Indian Emperor, which was again well received by many, but again also received criticism. But here, at this moment, one witnesses a turn of events. London, an important center of that time, was marred by plague, the Great Plague of London, 1665, and the Great Fire of London, 1666, were few significant events, disturbing events that took place during the 17th century. It was during this time that he went away to his family estate in Charlton, where he went on to write 3 excellent works of dramatic poesy, 1667, Secret Love, 1667, which was a tragicomedy, and Annus Mirabilis. Now, I would just like to give you a brief on Annus Mirabilis. So it is a Latin word meaning an year of notable events. And this was a significant work which he wrote. Like I said, each of his work had some contribution or had something to represent his contemporary times. And much like his times, this work represented, through mythological and allegorization, various aspects. Samuel Johnson wrote that Dryden used the significant phrase Annus Mirabilis, perhaps to suggest that it was a wonder that things were not worse. Things could have been worse. The fire could have engulfed the entire London. The plague could have killed some then that had been killed. But Dryden's way of empathizing with the public, of empathizing and showing his support to the country that he belonged was through his works, which even today are read by millions. Let us move ahead. He returned from his estate when things normalized. He went on to publish several other works, some of the famous being The Conquest of Granada and Marriage a la Mode. Now, The Conquest of Granada was a significant satire written by him. Now, students, if you remember, in the earlier part of my session, I did say that satire is an important characteristics of the Restoration period. And this is what and in fact, this is why John Dryden is known as a famous satirist of his time. He even makes usage of heroic drama. And the work goes on to demonstrate the Spanish conquest of the place known as Granada. When we look at the other work, Marriage a la Mode, why is it significant? It is significant because it was a comedy. And it chiefly becomes representative of a comedy known as Restoration comedy, because it depicted powerfully the battle between the sexes. It joked, it made fun of, it imitated, it mocked, it satirized the various elements of its contemporary times. And again, here one gets to see comedy of manners and important characteristics of the Restoration period being dominated in the work. And again, this was written in heroic couplet followed by blank verse. Now, blank verse, what is blank verse? I would want you to look up, but still I will give you a brief about it. It was basically written and made use of for the first time in English literature in a work known as Gorboduc. So that's why blank verse gradually began to be adopted. And John Dryden also went on to make use of various literary figures to further enhance the creativity of his literary writings. As one moves ahead, one realizes that John Dryden was indeed a man of many talents. He had already written a large amount of work which has significance even today. I have discussed some of it, and in the upcoming, as I move ahead, I will discuss some more of it and depict to you how beautifully John Dryden made use of his work. Let us move ahead. Now, I had spoken about his relationship with Robert Howard. He even went on to marry his sister. So, Robert Howard was now, in fact, John Dryden's brother-in-law. But something goes wrong here. The relationship between Robert Howard and John Dryden begins to decline. There is a sense of uneasiness, a sense of conflict which comes in between them due to their various approaches to various critical inputs to be offered in various literary works. And here, one of the chief reasons why the relationship fell apart was because over the use of rhyme in drama. And not only Robert Howard, he was attacked by many in their works. What I am trying to say here, as he went on to become more and more popular, his demand increased, so were his enemies. The next fallout or the next attack was by George Villiers, who was the second Duke of Buckingham. Why? Because George Villiers, the second Duke of Buckingham, blamed him for writing inferior poetry. And so, 1670s were marked by an era of public brawls. We looked at 1660s, where he tried to establish his foot in the literary circles. He brought forward various famous writings, which are read even till date. And the important cultural and political events that took place during that time, be it the Restoration period, be it the Great Plague, be it the London Fire. and how it was also a period when John Dryden got married. And then gradually we get to see that how 1670s in fact is considered by many critics as the period of public brawls for John Dryden. In fact, he went on to write one of the significant masterpieces known as Macflecknoe, written around 1678, where he attacks Thomas Shadwell, again a contemporary of his time, who was well known to him, with whom he had similar interest, but due to certain reasons, they too fell apart. Their relationship too fell apart. They had once collaborated with each other, but now their relationship fell apart. So when he wrote Macflecknoe, where he mocked and made fun of, satirized Thomas Shadwell. Now this aspect I want to say of satire is something I will be dealing with in my next session. So don't forget to watch it. Now let us come back to this session and his relationship with Thomas Shadwell. Even though initially they decided to have several collaboration, they were friendly literary figures with each other, the relationship fell apart. And what better than Macflecknoe? What better than Absalom and Achitophel can one witness it? Where, in fact, in the Absalom and Achitophel is, in fact, a mythologized written form of his contemporary times, where he makes several references, allegorical references to several figures of his time, including the rulers. Now, Thomas Shadwell was another important literary figure. But would he stay quiet? Would he be ready to take all the blames, all the attacks done on him through literary input by John Dryden? No. Thomas Shadwell too came out with certain works, one of them being The Medal of John Bayes, where he mocked John Dryden. This was very interesting. When he came out with The Medal of John Bayes, Dryden in return wrote The Medal. Harsh references also, like I said, were made in his other works to Thomas Shadwell. So like you see, the public brawls are well represented in the literary works, where each of the literary figure attacks one another through the written format, in a different way, but conveying the ideas intelligently. Some are implicit, some are allegorized, some are myth-based, but again, those who have to understand it have understood it, and they have also put forward their attack, put forward their point of view through the written works. Let us move ahead. Like I said, Macflecknoe was a significant work. During this era, another important significant work was written known as Absalom and Achitophel. Starting of 1680s, to be precise, 1681. It is counted as Dryden's one of the best works. Why? Because it went on to include various significant moments, contemporary events, be it historical, cultural or political. So be it the exclusion crisis, be it the popish plot, be it the praise of the royalists, all find their mention in this work. And that is why John Dryden is a man of many talents. Because much, like a collage of various ideas, he has put it all together in the form of a work. And beautifully, in a balanced way, demonstrated powerfully his support, his defense, his attack on various literary figures, various institutions, various belief systems, and so on. So Absalom and Achitophel became an important work which demonstrated Charles' triumph over his foes. So what I'm trying to say here is that if we want to look at chronologically the works of John Dryden, one realizes the relevance that they had during that time. The audiences were getting in front of them to chew on some realistic matter in a hidden manner. And that is why his work became all the more important. The layers that his work adopts to convey his message is what garnered attention of many intellectuals, of public, and in fact the court too. So much so that he was appointed as the poet laureate during the time of Charles II and the rule of his then Catholic brother, which followed the rule of Charles II, James II. Such was the relevance of John Dryden, and that is one reason why he was known as a man of many talents. Now let us look at another aspect. So if you're looking historically, one witnesses post 1616, there is the rule of Charles II. The rule of Charles II is followed by the rule of James II, and then there is a shift of the religious belief system. Why? Because James II is removed from the throne by a famous revolution known as the Glorious Revolution of 1688, and William III and his wife become the rulers. And who were they? They were Puritans. They established the Puritan regime. And this is again interesting to see that it is this time that John Dryden begins to fall out of favor. He is removed as a poet laureate because he refuses to demonstrate his loyalty to the new king and the queen. So in fact, it is also this time that during the rule of James II, when we look at the rule of James II, John Dryden converts himself into a Catholic. So these important events had a deep impact on the life of John Dryden. And this is something that we can clearly see. So students, it is very important to understand when one looks at literature, it is all layered. It is all influenced by the other. The social events, the cultural events, the historical events, all influence one another, as one can see through the life of John Dryden. Now let us move forward. Like I said, I would be talking a bit about John Dryden and his use of heroic couplets. So what were the heroic couplets that John Dryden so often began to use? So it is important to understand that heroic couplets were extensively used by Chaucer, as visible in the work The Canterbury Tales and Legend of Good Women. But it was in 17th century that it began to be used dominantly by not only John Dryden but also Alexander Pope. Dryden also uses, as I said, it in his Absalom and Achitophel and various of his other works. So what exactly is heroic couplet? So M.H. Abrams defines it as lines of iambic pentameter which rhyme in pairs AA, BB, CC and so on. This is again important to understand. So this is the definition of heroic couplets. But what is iambic pentameter? To define iambic pentameter, I have made use of another significant person known as J.A. Cudden, who writes that an iamb is a metrical foot consisting of unstressed syllables followed by syllable, thus followed by a stressed syllable. So there is an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable, and therefore this is what an iamb is. And when one is talking about iambic pentameter, it refers to 5 metrical feet where each foot consists of an unstressed syllables and a stressed syllable. In fact, Auden famously for this reason called John Dryden as the master of the middle style because of his extensive use of heroic couplets. Now again, when one looks at the 1680s, we have reached 1680s, he went on to write several other significant works. To name a few, it was Britannia Rediviva, which celebrated the birth of son and heir to Catholic king and queen. But unfortunately, in the same year, Glorious Revolution takes place. Don Sebastian, written in 1689, Amphitryon, 1690, King Arthur in 1691, which again highlights elements of Jacobitism, in fact aims to restore the Catholic Church. These elements are well visible in this work. Love Triumphant, 1694, which fell among his final plays. So again, he went on to write several works and several genres, be it drama, be it poetry, anything you ask was written by John Dryden that belonged to the literary genre. And that is why he was a significant figure during his time. Not only because of his works, but also because he was a poet laureate. And he was a poet laureate for a reason. In fact, not only because he had royalist sympathies, but also because of the creative bent of his mind, which is well witnessed in his works. So beautifully he's written several of his works that even today his work is constantly remembered and is still being researched upon in great detail. Let us move forward. Now 1680s was also an important period. Why? Because whereas in the 1660s and 1670s, one witnesses him being involved with various works which give references to various political events, etc. The time of 1680s, he went on to write various religious works. Why did he begin writing various religious works during this time? Was it because of his changing stance, or was it because of his creativity reaching another level where he felt fit enough to explore this idea all the more? Let us try to understand this. Like I said, 1680s was a period which was marked by Glorious Revolution of 1688. This was also a period, 1680s was also his period wherein he began, this was the last years of his career. It also saw him as a translator of major works, be it Virgil's Aeneid, Ovid's Metamorphoses, miscellany poems, Sylvia, Roman philosopher Lucretius is well explored in his works, Greek philosopher Theocritus is also translated, and later writers Boccaccio and Chaucer are also looked at. So apart from various translations that he went on to write, he also wrote several significant works known as the religious work. One of the religious works that he wrote during the 16th century was Religio Laicae. As one sees, Religio Laicae, written in 1683, was a significant religious poem as it reflects his support to the Church of England. He also explores the idea of major religious issues in this work. This is again significant because now we have progressed through his works which have developed, and one gets to know that he has almost covered all aspects of his contemporary times, be it the political one, be it the social one, be it the religious one, all of it has been covered. The next work, which again is an important religious work, so he wrote two significant works which are referred to even today if one has to look at the religious works. One is Religio Laicae and the other is The Hind and the Panther, written in 1687, which is a beast fable. The relevance of beast fable lies in the fact that even in this work, John Dryden has gone on to show not only his royalist sympathies, but also is tried to establish and determine the kind of rules, the kind of approaches that different sects of religion had during his times. This was again an allegory, it was a heroic couplet. He also depicts that he became a Catholic by conviction and not for political reasons. For something that he's blamed throughout, like I suggested, he's blamed to be a political turncoat, and Samuel Johnson famously said he just changed with the changing times, which one should understand. to go further into The Hind and the Panther, it is again, depicts the theological differences between the Catholic Church, represented by the hind, and the Anglican Church, represented by the panther. Another important aspect that one gets to see here is, unlike the secular and the political works with which he came out earlier, this time is dominated by religious work. This is what I have tried to show. In fact, in his earlier works, he was too occupied with the idea of form and language. But here, he has gained confidence, and it seems he feels mature enough to delve deeper into the topics of concern, chief topics of concern during his contemporary time, which of course was religion. Religion and politics of the 17th century, and even today as we know, are strongly intertwined, so much so that each influences the other. The Hind and the Panther was an ambitious work. He tries to demonstrate the sectarian division through various beasts, which become strong representatives of it. It is so beautifully written, and it is so well layered that you can easily peel off each layer and read the meaning below each layer that is present. So let us move a bit ahead. He wrote several other works, and his final work was Fables, Ancient and Modern. This work again is significant because why? This was his last work. He died on May 12, 1700 and was initially buried at St. Anne's Cemetery, but later reburied in Westminster Abbey. We all know that several of the literary figures are lay buried in a place known as Westminster Abbey. So students, this was John Dryden before you. John Dryden indeed was a man of many talents. He was a stalwart of his times. He was a famous personality, not only because of his religious tilts, but also the way he handled all of it, be it the public brawls, be it the criticism he received for being called a turncoat, who was considered an opportunist, as and when the moment arose, be it anything. But John Dryden, apart from all this, is still remembered to be a man of many talents. He has come out with various famous works which powerfully establish him to be one. He has handled all the situations well. He has dealt between the sectarian divisions well. He lived a life of a famous literary figure, and even today he is considered to be one. I just want to end my session by stating that it was for this reason why famous literary figures like Walter Scott called him Glorious John. It was for this reason that Robert Greene stated, Dryden has certainly no equal. His spirit is inextinguishable. Such was John Dryden. Before I end my session, I hope you enjoyed my session. Don't forget to watch my next session, which will be on satire, as well as I will be giving a specific reference of satire and its usage during the 17th century and by John Dryden in particular. Students, I hope you enjoyed today's session. Hope to see you soon. Thank you.
With this note, we would like to thank Dr. Nayat Chaudhary once again, and dear friends, we believe that your feedbacks are very, very precious for us. So do write to us at info.cec@nic.in. This is the ID where you can put in your questions as well as your feedbacks too. We will be meeting again very soon. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, Dr. Nayat Chaudhary.
Thank you, Geetika.